While filming for Rocky IV, Sylvester Stallone challenged Dolph Lundgren to try to knock him out for real. Lundgren hit him so hard that he was sent to the ICU for 9 days and was lucky to survive. The Cordoba fighting dog was a dog breed that became so aggressive that it was very difficult to breed them, since a pair would often fight to the death rather than mate. This eventually contributed to their extinction before the 20th century. This photo from 1960 shows segregationists harassing 6-year-old Ruby Bridges, the first black child to attend an all-white school. They portrayed her as a doll laying in a coffin to protest her attendance at the school. Chester the Molester was a comic strip by Dwayne Tinsley that featured a pedophile named Chester who was interested in molesting young girls. After producing the comic strip for 13 years, Tinsley was convicted of molesting his teenage daughter Allison over a 5-year span. Paul McCartney decided not to tell his wife Linda that her cancer progressed and had become terminal. He didn't think it would do her any good if she knew, so she continued riding her horse until the day before she died. These were just some of the wedding rings that were taken from victims of Buchenwald concentration camp during the Holocaust. It's estimated that around 100,000 Japanese people vanish without a trace every year. Many of these cases are people simply trying to save their honor after a divorce, job loss, or a failed exam. After the 1947 murder of Elizabeth Short, aka Black Dahlia, reporters told her mother that Elizabeth had just taken first place in a beauty contest. Once they had enough information from her for their story, they informed Mrs. Short that her daughter had actually been viciously murdered. In 2018, 17-year-old Jordan Turpin called 911 to report that she and her 12 siblings were being abused by their parents. This is sadly rather common, but what police discovered in the Turpin household was far more horrific than anything they'd seen before. The entire house reeked of human excrement, decaying garbage, and dead pets that were scattered throughout the home. Many of the 12 children had been tied to their beds and were covered in bruises and dirt. It was clear that David and Louise Turpin had been torturing their children for years, allowing them to eat just once per day and shower just once per year. They would reportedly often leave food on the table and force their children to stare at it before throwing it away in the trash. This resulted in extreme malnourishment, as their oldest son was 29 years old but weighed just 82 pounds at the time of their rescue. The kids were so clearly abused that a few doctors broke down in tears upon seeing them for the first time. The Turpin parents were handed 12 counts of torture among numerous other charges and were effectively sentenced to life in prison. This photo shows The Undertaker looking down at medical staff after chokeslamming Mick Foley through the roof of Hell in a Cell. The fall was completely unplanned and left Foley with multiple dislocations, bruised ribs, and internal bleeding. The Undertaker was certain he'd just killed the man, but Foley got up and even finished the match. The band Fleetwood Mac highly considered thanking their drug dealer in the credits of their most popular album, Rumors. They only decided against it after their dealer was murdered. In 2010, a commercial plane crash in Africa killed everyone on board except for one passenger, who was left with an insane story to tell his rescuers. Apparently, a man smuggled a crocodile on board, which managed to escape shortly before landing. This made everyone panic and run to one side of the plane at one time, causing it to flip and eventually crash. This devastating photo was taken in India during the Madras famine of 1877. The man is fighting the urge to sleep so that he could protect his family against cannibals. People were so desperate for food that your own neighbor could snatch up your child to eat them at any given time. In 2010, Dave Grohl was admitted to the hospital due to an overdose. He apparently consumed too much caffeine from coffee and thought he was about to die after experiencing severe chest pains. Also in 2010, a homeless man named Hugo saved a woman from a knife attack in New York City. He was stabbed while trying to help but continued chasing the attacker before collapsing to his wounds. Security cams captured more than 20 people walking past and staring at him, but no one offered to help. He was found dead on the sidewalk more than an hour after the attack. Stricken with polio in 1952, Paul Alexander has been living in an iron lung for 70 years. He may be the only person left in one, since modern technology has created far more practical methods for respiration. But if Paul leaves this machine for even a few minutes, he will stop breathing and almost certainly die. 6 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the sunken battleship USS West Virginia was finally salvaged from the ocean floor. On that ship, a calendar was found inside of an airtight room where 3 sailors had marked off 16 days until they died. In 2013, a French man on a business trip died of a heart attack while having sex with a stranger. A French court later ruled that it was a workplace accident and that his wife and family were entitled to compensation. Many say he did it for his family. This one made me puke. A female orangutan named Pony was used as a sex slave in a village on the Asian island of Borneo. She was shaved and chained to a bed daily, and whenever a man approached her, she would automatically assume a submissive position. In 1965, a device was patented to deliver a baby using centrifugal force. The machine would spin around until the baby popped out, which would then be caught in a net. An armadillo's armor is so tough that a Texas man once shot at one on his property and the bullet ricocheted back, hitting the man in the face. In 1951, New Zealand author Janet Frame was diagnosed with schizophrenia and was scheduled for a lobotomy. But just days before the operation, she won New Zealand's most prestigious literary award, prompting doctors to cancel the operation that would mash her brain. In 2013, 16-year-old Ethan Couch killed 4 people while drunk driving. But he initially wasn't sentenced to any jail time since his attorney argued that he suffered from affluenza, a mental illness caused by growing up with too much money. In ancient Sparta, only 2 groups of people could have their names inscribed on their tombstones: men who died in battle and women who died in childbirth. In 1994, Los Angeles police arrested a man dressed as the Grim Reaper carrying a scythe. He was reported by various nursing homes after staring through patients' windows while wearing the costume. In the year 2000, the charred remains of Mary Lou Morris were found in her burned-out car in Houston, Texas. Only 4 days later, the body of Mary McGinnis Morris was found in her burned-out car in Houston, Texas. Police believe that a hitman killed the wrong Mary Morris and tried to fix it. Morbid Facts, Part 269. Ever since they were little kids, twins June and Jennifer Gibbons refused to speak to anyone other than each other. By the time they turned 18, they'd committed multiple criminal offenses and were sent to a high-security mental hospital in 1981. Years prior, they made a long-standing agreement that if one of them ever died, the other must begin to speak and attempt to live a normal life. While at the mental hospital, they decided it was now necessary for one of them to die, and Jennifer agreed to make the sacrifice. In March of 1993, Jennifer was rushed to the hospital where she died of a sudden inflammation of the heart. There was no evidence of drugs or poisoning in her system. It was as if she'd just died out of nowhere. Afterwards, June said she was finally liberated from her sister and was eventually released from the asylum. She now talks to people and has lived a relatively normal life ever since. In 2010, Ozzy Osbourne had his genome sequenced to understand how it was possible for him to still be alive after abusing his body for so many years. Researchers found mutations related to addiction, metabolism, and Ozzy's Neanderthal ancestors. In fact, he carries several 100,000 genetic variants that have never been seen before by scientists. Meaning if he wasn't a literal mutant, he likely would have died decades ago. There have been at least 9 different studies on the DARE program, and all of them agree that it either does nothing or only worsens the problem. Gary Webb was an investigative journalist who was one of the first to report on the CIA's involvement in the cocaine trade. A few years later in 2004, Gary was found dead in his home with 2 gunshot wounds to the head. His death was officially ruled a suicide. If your skin ever starts turning yellow like the photo on the left, you should see a doctor as soon as possible. This man had a condition called jaundice, which can indicate serious problems with the liver. These photos were taken before and after the man received a liver transplant. Before the murder of Shinzo Abe, the most recent political assassination in Japan happened in 1960. Leader of the Socialist Party, Inajiro Asanuma, was attacked by a 17-year-old wielding a sword. The brutal murder was captured live on television and broadcasted to millions across Japan. A group of researchers in Africa once hid a speaker near a herd of elephants and played a recording of one of their herd members who had died. The dead elephant's family suddenly went wild calling for him, and his daughter cried out for days afterward. The researchers later vowed to never conduct such an inhumane experiment again. There's a blue whale that sings at such high frequencies that he's unable to communicate with other whales. Nicknamed 52 Blue, his calls have been heard since the 1980s but never receive a response. Waist chopping was a popular execution method in ancient China that involved sawing the body clean in half. But it was banned in 1734 after a Chinese official was cut in half and still managed to write the Chinese word for awful 7 times in his own blood. In 2005, one sheep decided to jump off a cliff, causing 1,500 others to follow. But only the first 450 actually died, since the rest of the falls were cushioned by the dead bodies below. The Great Whiskey Fire of Dublin killed 13 people in 1875, but none of them died from the actual fire. They were all killed by alcohol poisoning after drinking too much of the whiskey pouring through the streets. Former WWE wrestler Chris Benoit is considered to be one of the most talented professional wrestlers of all time. But sadly, his career was tainted when the 40-year-old murdered his wife and son before taking his own life in 2007. After multiple tests were conducted, it was revealed that his brain was so damaged from wrestling that he had the brain of an 85-year-old with an advanced form of dementia, likely contributing to his horrific behavior. In 2012, a UK surgeon was fired and convicted of assault after branding his initials into the livers of 2 of his patients. It was only discovered when another surgeon had to perform a corrective surgery on one of the patients. In 2013, Florida man Jeff Bush was sleeping in his bedroom when a sinkhole opened up beneath him and swallowed him whole. His brother heard his screams from across the house and immediately ran over to start digging, but Jeff's body was never recovered. Frank Lentini was a circus performer in the early 1900s who was born with a parasitic twin. This resulted in him having 3 legs, 4 feet, 16 toes, and yes, 2 sets of functioning genitals. He married, had 4 kids, and lived to the age of 78. Here's a clip of Admiral Jeremiah Denton blinking the word torture in Morse code while he was held captive in the Vietnam War. He was being filmed for Vietnamese propaganda, but U.S. naval intelligence was able to decipher his message. In 1979, gold miners in Alaska stumbled upon this perfectly preserved steppe bison that's right around 50,000 years old. It was so incredibly intact that researchers decided to take a chunk of muscle from its neck and cook it into a meal. It was described as tough like beef jerky, but quite delicious aside from the muddy aftertaste. When former NFL safety Dave Dworson took his own life in 2011, he left a note that read, "Please see that my brain is given to the NFL's brain bank." He shot himself in the chest so that his brain would be preserved, and doctors confirmed he was suffering from severe CTE. In 2007, children going to see The Last Mimsy at a movie theater in Florida were accidentally shown The Hills Have Eyes 2 instead, the opening scene of which features a chained naked woman giving birth to a deformed baby. The theater apologized for the trauma and gave all the parents free tickets. In 1971, a Texas state representative introduced a bill that honored a serial killer for his work in population control. He did this simply to prove that most of his colleagues passed bills without even reading them. And he was correct, since it was passed unanimously. This coffin-like capsule will allow people to end their own lives by lowering the oxygen level to 1% within 5 minutes. The creators of this suicide pod are seeking approval for legal use in Switzerland, claiming that it will give people the option to go out peacefully and comfortably. When the Nazi Party held its first book burning, one of the works destroyed was a 1921 play by Heinrich Heine. It contained the famous phrase, "Where they burn books, they will also, in the end, burn people." In August of 2001, actor James Woods reported 4 suspicious men on his flight, but authorities didn't take his claims seriously. Turns out there were 4 of the hijackers who had crashed into the World Trade Center on 9/11, and this was one of their test runs. Back in June, a 3-year-old boy named Riker Webb wandered off from his family's yard in Montana and went missing in the wilderness for 2 days. This photo was taken when he was miraculously found alive in a shed more than 2 miles away from his home. Authorities say he was extremely lucky, considering the valley he was found in is riddled with mountain lions and bears. In the heat of COVID, an Asian man was arrested for training his pit bull to drop bricks on people who rang his doorbell. Attack of the Dead Men was a World War I battle during which the Germans bombarded the Russians with a mixture of poisonous gases. The effects were so devastating that the Russians coughed up pieces of their own organs and their skin started dissolving. The zombie-like appearance was so horrifying to the 7,000 Germans that they gave up the battle and ran. This photo of Sean and Michael McQuilkin was taken at Sequoia National Park just seconds before they were struck by lightning in 1975. All 3, including their photographer sister, survived the strike, but younger brother Sean suffered 3rd-degree burns and spent nearly 6 months in a coma. After being unable to overcome the physical and mental toll of the incident, Sean sadly ended up taking his own life in 1989. after having an allergic reaction to asthma medicine in 2009. Tennessee woman Shanina Isom has been suffering from a mysterious skin condition that causes her to grow fingernails in place of her hair. In 2004, 200 women armed with kitchen knives stormed into an Indian courthouse before stabbing and murdering Akuya Dav, a gang leader, serial killer, and rapist who kept escaping his sentencing due to bribes. Every single woman later claimed responsibility for killing him. The short-faced bear was once the most abundant bear in all of North America until it went extinct around 11,000 BC. Some scientists argue that these massive bears delayed human migration into North America because they kept killing men trying to cross the Bering Strait. Heart Attack Grill is a restaurant in Las Vegas where customers over 350 pounds eat for free. The only vegan option on the menu is cigarettes, and up to 3 people have died from heart attacks while eating there. In 1940, Walt Disney hired 11 little people to dress up as Pinocchio and wave to people at the movie's premiere. He left them on a theater balcony with enough food and wine for the day, but there was no way for them to get down. By late afternoon, they had all taken off their thick, sweaty costumes and were naked, drunk, and swearing at parents and their children. When a predatory producer assaulted one of her friends, Carrie Fisher sent him a Tiffany box with a severed cow tongue inside. She also left a note inside that read, "The next delivery will be something of yours in a much smaller box." When Britain changed the packaging of Tylenol to blister packs instead of bottles, the suicide rate from Tylenol declined by nearly 50%. Anyone who wanted a lethal dose of 50 pills now had to push them out one by one instead of easily dumping them out from a bottle. In 2013, a 60-year-old Japanese truck driver found out he was accidentally switched at birth in a Tokyo hospital in 1953. His biological parents were very wealthy, and the infant who took his place grew up to own a successful real estate company. Meanwhile, the original son was raised by a poor single mother and struggled with poverty throughout his entire life. For 24 years, Missouri woman Dee Dee Blanchard pretended that her daughter Gypsy had multiple chronic conditions. She claimed her daughter suffered from leukemia, asthma, muscular dystrophy, and had the mental capacity of a 7-year-old. Dee Dee forced her to stay in a wheelchair and act disabled, subjecting her to many unnecessary surgeries and medications. Gypsy was often fed through a feeding tube and supplied air through an oxygen tank. Her mother also regularly shaved the girl's head to give her the appearance of a cancer patient. Whenever Gypsy suggested that she wasn't actually sick, her mother would physically harm her. In 2015, Gypsy was finally tired of her mother's horrific abuse and sent her boyfriend to stab Dee Dee 17 times in the back. Today, Gypsy is still serving out her 10-year sentence after pleading guilty to second-degree murder of her abusive mother. In 1959, a white man named John Howard Griffin disguised himself as a black man and traveled through the Deep South for 6 weeks. After writing a book about his experiences with racism, he was forced to move to Mexico for several years due to the barrage of death threats. Albert Einstein died at the age of 76 after refusing to undergo surgery on his heart. He was quoted saying, "I want to go when I want. It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I have done my share, it's time to go. I will do so elegantly." In September of 1974, 18-year-old Milika Kostic was lured to a 12th-floor apartment by 5 men who attempted to assault her. When given the chance, she decided to jump from the apartment window and fell about 120 feet onto a cafe awning below. She died 2 days later, but was conscious for long enough to give police a full description of the awful incident. Prior to filming The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger locked himself in a hotel room and talked to only himself for 6 straight weeks. He said this helped him land more in the realm of a psychopath to prepare for his iconic role of the Joker. Many believe this extreme dedication was partially responsible for his accidental overdose on sleeping pills the next year. A horrific bungee cord injury caused this man's iris to completely collapse. Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma used to be the wealthiest black community in all of America. That was until 1921 when a mob of white supremacists attacked the community with the help of the National Guard. Using guns, explosives, and even airplanes, they decimated 35 square blocks of the neighborhood and murdered hundreds of African Americans. It's known today as the Black Wall Street Massacre. In 1996, obsessed fan Ricardo Lopez mailed a letter bomb to the home of Icelandic singer Björk. He then shot himself on camera, hoping that he and Björk would be united in heaven. But a few days later, police found his body along with his video diaries, and the package was intercepted. After his mother died in 2013, Arizona man Jim Stauffer donated her body for scientific research. He later found out that her corpse was instead sold to the US military for $6,000 and blown up at a bomb testing site. In 2015, British woman Amanda Plale began receiving threatening emails from a stalker which included photos of her in public. She was terrorized for 2 straight years and was soon too afraid to even leave her home. Luckily, authorities eventually discovered that the emails were coming from inside her own house. Turns out it was her loving husband the entire time. Shortly after returning from the moon, Buzz Aldrin fell into deep depression and addiction. He was quoted saying, "I wanted to resume my duties, but there were no duties to resume. There was no goal, no sense of calling, no project worth pouring myself into." Police in Pakistan are searching for a religious healer who reportedly convinced a pregnant woman that hammering a 2-inch nail into her skull would help her give birth to a boy. The woman became desperate after her husband threatened to divorce her if she gave birth to another girl for the 4th time. Lucy Studi from Iowa claims that her late father was a serial killer who murdered up to 70 women throughout the 70s and 80s. She told authorities that the man forced his kids to help bury the bodies, many of them thrown into a well that's since been filled in. Police aren't exactly sure how to approach it, especially since Lucy's sister says she's lying about the whole thing. This iconic photograph of 28-year-old Marcy Borders covered in dust was taken just after the World Trade Center collapsed on 9/11. Marcy was a bank teller who worked on the 81st floor of the North Tower. She survived the collapse, but sadly died from cancer in 2014, likely caused by the toxic fumes she was exposed to. This is the gravestone of H.R. Giger, the Swiss artist and sculptor who designed the creatures for the movie Alien. On a British Airways flight in 1995, a woman was complaining of chest pain, so 2 doctors came over to check on her. They quickly realized she was suffering from a punctured lung and required immediate surgery. But the problem was they couldn't land for help since the increase in air pressure could kill her. So they performed mid-air surgery on her using a coat hanger, silverware, and a bottle of cognac for sterilization. Within 10 minutes, they'd saved her life. In the summer of 2021, 40-year-old Jerry Smith was posing on Tinder as a woman named Angie Renee when he met 18-year-old football player Isemimen Itute. After they got together and went all the way with each other, Itute realized that Angie was a man. That's when the 6'3" linebacker stomped and beat the man to death. Just earlier this year, he was acquitted of all murder charges. This photo from the early 1900s shows nurses standing with mentally ill patients wrapped in wet linens. This treatment method was thought to be calming for patients, despite many of them constantly screaming to get out. Here's a 1989 photo of South African spearfisherman Gerhio van Niekerk showing off his recent bite mark from a great white. He told reporters, quote, "It was a 1 in a million freak accident." While diving near Cape Town just 2 months afterwards, Gerhio went missing until his shark-bitten leg washed ashore a few days later. In 2004, a Georgia man was found naked and beaten unconscious next to a dumpster behind a Burger King. He didn't have any possessions or ID on him and couldn't even remember his own name. When he looked at himself in the mirror, he recognized himself but realized he was about 20 years older than he thought. For the next decade, authorities struggled to identify the man despite TV coverage and a nationwide effort. Given the alias Benjamin Kyle, the man was unable to obtain employment without his social security number and therefore became homeless for several years. It wasn't until 2015 when he was finally identified through DNA testing as William Burgess Powell, born in 1948. But despite this discovery, there's still a 20-year gap in his life history with no documented records or anything he can remember. Japan has always been known for its wacky game shows, but in 1998, one particular show took this to the extreme. A man nicknamed Nasubi was selected to be locked inside of an apartment with nothing but a supply of water and thousands of magazines. He was challenged to enter mail-in sweepstakes until he won about $10,000 in prizes, but he was given no food, no clothes, and no form of human contact. His only means of survival were the items he won from the magazines. The man was told it was only experimental and that he was to record himself for a later broadcast. But in reality, his entire experience was live-streamed to an audience of tens of millions of people to watch and make fun of. There were times when Nasubi went weeks without food and was fortunate to win items such as dog food and uncooked rice. On one occasion, he won a can of spaghetti after starving for days, but he couldn't eat it since he didn't have a can opener. When Nasubi would break down mentally and cry in front of the camera, the show's producers would play a laugh track to the audience so that they would find it funny. After 355 days of pure isolation and torture, Nasubi had achieved his goal, but the show had become far too popular for producers to end. So in the middle of the night, he was blindfolded and taken to a new apartment, where he was given the task of winning enough magazine prizes to win a plane ticket back home. This goal was revised several times to the point where it took Nasubi an extra 3 months to finally win the game show. He was again blindfolded and brought to a final apartment where the walls suddenly dropped and he was met with a massive live audience. Still naked and confused, Nasubi would soon realize that his endeavors were live broadcasted the entire time. The entire experiment lasted about 15 months in total, and the horrific show broke many TV records with a peak of about 17 million viewers each night. For months and even years after the ordeal, Nasubi reported being uncomfortable in clothing and struggled heavily with human interaction. Octomom Nadia Sulman became notorious in 2009 when she had 8 babies as a result of in vitro fertilization. However, Nadia claimed that while she was heavily sedated, it was her fertility specialist that convinced her to have 12 embryos implanted in her at once. All of the babies miraculously survived, but the doctor had his license revoked for extreme malpractice. This violin was used by the lead member of the band that played on the Titanic. Just like in the movie, they continued playing as the ship went down. Former beauty queen Joyce McKinney made headlines in 1977 when she kidnapped 17-year-old Mormon boy Kirk Anderson from his church. According to Anderson, she chained him to her bed frame and forced him to be her sex slave for 3 straight days. But according to British law at the time, no crime of rape had been committed since the victim was male. In 1981, David Kerwin was driving through Yellowstone's hot springs with his friend Ronald Ratcliffe and Ronald's dog Moosey. At some point, they parked their car for a better look, but Moosey suddenly jumped into one of the hot springs and started yelping. Even though many people warned him not to jump into the near boiling water, David dove straight in and attempted to rescue the suffering dog. He grabbed Moosey and made it close to the edge before letting go and sinking until his friend pulled him back out. Immediately afterwards, David muttered, "That was stupid. How bad am I? That was a stupid thing I did." He was immediately blinded since the hot spring had melted his eyeballs, and when someone helped to pull his shoe off, his skin came off with it. He sustained third-degree burns over 100% of his body and died the next day after living his final hours in agonizing pain. Sadly, Moosey the dog also did not survive.